I hope you're having a pleasant afternoon. This is really mid to late autumn here in Korea in November. It is a great pleasure to be here with all of you. And we are now here for the Global Climate Change and Carbon Neutral Cities Conference. Welcome all of you to the conference. I am your MC. My name is Jang Sun-young. It's a great pleasure to see you all here. Thank you. We are almost at the end of November. Used to be very cold, but nowadays we have quite a moderate temperature. We talk about climate change and climate crisis, and it's not about a distant future. It is actually right now. And also, this is not just a Korean problem. This is a global challenge. So the international community is working hard to deal with this. So LH, Korea Land and Housing Corporation, has been working together to deal with climate change. And today's conference is also part of that effort. The conference title is the Global Climate Change and Carbon Neutral Cities. So today we are going to talk about many cities' efforts to achieve carbon neutrality around the world, and we will talk about how to deal with the climate change issue. And we will also think about the right policy direction to achieve these goals and how better to cooperate with each other at the international level. We are going to listen to 3 presentations followed by panel discussion. So I hope that today's conference will give you a great insight and information. For the first presentation, I'd like to invite researcher Mr. Jung Hui-chul from KEI. He's going to talk about carbon neutrality and adaptation in response to the climate change. Please welcome Mr. Jung to the podium.
Good afternoon. My name is Hichul Jung from KEI. Today, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to speak at 2022 Global Korea Forum. My topic for presentation today is the achievement of carbon neutrality and the necessity for adaptation to respond to climate crisis. Nowadays, climate change is a threat to us as a natural disaster. Most of the damages have gone up, and compared to the 1970s, natural disaster has gone up by 5-fold and economic loss by 7-fold. Fortunately, the human casualty has gone down by 1/3. But if you look at the human casualties, it is now being concentrated in developing countries or to a certain economic class. So it is still a very critical issue. Also, flood has increased significantly to threaten our lives. According to another study, we see the similar result. And one thing we have to look into and pay attention to is that where these natural disasters take place. And it is concentrated in Asian countries. Out of top 10, 8 countries are Asian countries. And regarding climate change, we see a 2-fold increase in climate crisis or a natural disaster regarding climate change. And the large portion is coming from flood. And death in low-income countries is 4 times higher than advanced nations. Having safe infrastructure and having this infrastructure readiness is important. If you don't have that readiness, it seems that it is likely that the damages will be highly concentrated. What we're also concerned about is that we have to concern about the climate change and increasing changes in climate, but also the lack of response And overlooking the serious issue of climate change is also an issue. There is cold weather and a snowstorm and mountain fires, and California's mountain fires and flood in Southeast Asia is becoming a global issue. This kind of damages hurt our properties, as well as it leads to human casualties, but there is also uncertainties in energy supply, and land or mountain fire has also threatened the air pollution, and it is threatening the place that humans reside. And also, it's very difficult for us to actively respond to this kind of crisis, because it's difficult to put in enough budget and enough preparation into something that rarely takes place, and that takes place unexpectedly. We asked 1,000 scholars in this area globally what is the most critical risk and issue in the next 10 years. And these scholars didn't say climate change, but they said the lack of readiness or lack of preparation for climate change. So many of these scholars were worried about lack of preparation, and including IDC and many of the research institutions believe that we have a very early stage preparation. According to IPC report, unfortunately, even at the best scenario, by 2040 in all models, the global warming will likely exceed by 1.5 degrees Celsius. 1.5 degrees Celsius will be exceeded even if we achieve that through carbon neutrality. So we need to continuously make effort to reduce Earth average temperature according to IPCC. Until 2050, we might expect overshooting experience, and the species will be affected. And even if we have active response, and even if we achieve NDC, we believe that there will be 2.7 degrees Celsius of warming. Even if we achieve carbon neutrality, we still will have plus 0.3 degrees Celsius higher temperature for Earth average temperature, regardless of achieving carbon neutrality. So are we ready? So we need to really think about this issue. We have developed climate change response strategy for 3 times, and there has been 3 rounds of strategy development, but we don't have enough information to see whether or not we're safe enough. So how safe is it, or is it sustainable? We need a more strategic approach and scientific information to answer these questions, and that's something that we lack. And in preparing for future, uncertainties is a barrier to inputting budget and resources. So in order to invest and resource, we need to invest amid uncertainties, or should secure certainty, but still actions and implementing adaptation is still facing a lot of barriers because of these uncertainties and lack of certainties. So we are preparing and increasing preparation by 10 to 20%, but is it enough? And in addition to government budget and government investment, how much investment do we need from the private sector? It is timely that we start that discussion, and we need to start building database for that. Then let me just talk focusing on Korea and Korea's climate change. What you see here is it's released by the Korea Meteorological Scientific Research Institution. Globally, this is the model that they have generated, and average temperature will go up from 2 degrees Celsius to 5 degrees Celsius, and precipitation is likely to go up by 5 to 10%. And when you look at bottom left, the KCA model is about 0.85 degrees Celsius higher. So when you look at the Korea's meteorological model, it is 1 degree Celsius higher than the global average. With that in mind, let's move on. Also, KMA looked into the Korea's temperature and precipitation again, and according to their modeling, which was announced in 2021, as you can see, the Korean Peninsula's temperature increase will go up by 2.6 to 7 degrees Celsius. So this means that the temperature increase on the Korean Peninsula will be higher than the global average. And if you look at the curve for temperature, it is in linear curve. So you can see that there's a distinctive differences in a linear manner. So you can see the impact of carbon neutrality. But when it comes to rainstorm and drought, it's something that we have to prepare no matter what. Especially until 2050, what we will be seeing more will be the impact from drought rather than the rainstorms. So by reducing carbon, our carbon reduction scenario is somewhat vulnerable, and we still do not have the correlation that has been established against rainstorm and drought. Also, this was also released by KMA on the overall climate change in East Asia regarding global warming. When you look at the overall temperature, when the temperature increased by twofold, you will be seeing extreme weather situation by twofold as well. So if there is a rise of temperature by 3 degrees Celsius, compared to 1.5 degrees warming, there will be 2 times more extreme high temperature phenomena. So our NDC was on 2.7 degrees Celsius. So even if we fail on carbon neutrality, the most likelihood of temperature increase will be 3 degrees Celsius. So our heat wave, therefore, will likely go up by twofold as well. According to KEI analysis using KMA model, a 2 degrees Celsius increase compared to Industrial Revolution will reach the KMA model by 2036, and 3 degrees Celsius will be reached in 2065. And if you look at global average versus South Korea, when you look at dotted line, which is the global average, the straight line is the Korea's increase. And as time prolongs, the gap of the temperature, it widens. So if we act late, and if we don't act immediately, we will require more resource and more investment. And time is against us at the moment. So in order to reduce this gap, we need to be prompt in taking our action. So we have 2 degrees as orange line, and red is 3 degrees Celsius. And this is the prediction on how the natural disaster will unfold. The risk by IPCC talks about the scenario of negative phenomena taking place, like hazard taking place and how much we're exposed to it, and how vulnerability can take place. So as we can see, on the right side, if we don't reduce anything then that's the business as usual, and we try to calculate how much we can reduce, the maximum amount of reduction that we can achieve, and then try to calculate our target reduction goal. On heat wave, this is our forecast. Left is our current status, and the right side is the BAU case, which is the worst case. So 2 degrees Celsius, and NDC is 3 degrees Celsius. And as you can see, the red area is widening. The current heat wave is going to be accompanied by alert issued by KMA. So this heat wave is at a level where there could be some patient who will be hit by this heat wave. So when there is a heat wave, therefore, there will be some casualties. So out of 1 year, 365 days, there will be about up to 6 heat wave days. And then there will be, for instance, in 2 degrees Celsius, we will have 1 month of a weather warning for heat wave. And for 3 degrees Celsius, we'll have about 3 months of heat wave warning. And because in the urban area there are concrete road and asphalt road, we'll even have even more dire situation. And this will lead to human casualty and also damages on our properties. And this will be an increase by 10 to 15 fold. And Daegu is known for high heat wave days, but as you can see, their average days are 15 days. And in 2 degrees Celsius scenario and 3 degrees Celsius scenario, as you can see, Daegu is hit the hardest. And not just heat waves, but when you look at Daegu area, they are also well prepared for a heat wave as well. So Daegu is the most hardest hit area when the scenario is 2 degrees, but when it becomes 3 degrees increase, Jeju will face more severe impact. But is Jeju prepared or as prepared as Daegu? That's something that we have to consider. The highest reduction area or the reduction impact will be highest when reduction takes place in Jeju region. And even if this being the fact, in 3 degrees Celsius, Jeju will still experience the highest increase in heat wave days. Until 2050, this is a forecast on drought. Drought is related to farming water supply. And I said that the reduction volume is uncertain. So regardless of timing, serious drought is relatively lower in 3 degrees Celsius than 2 degrees. According to our analysis, if we have global warming of 2 degrees Celsius, we would experience 1 month of severe drought. In 3 degrees Celsius, we'll have about 0.8 month of severe drought. And the southern area will be hit hardest with drought. And through reduction, if we can curve and manage this by 2 to 3 degrees, in between 2 to 3 degrees, we'll be able to reduce drought by 0.8 month. The most severely hit area will be the metropolitan area, like Incheon and Gyeonggi area. But even if we have drought, infrastructure is more than enough, and there's also enough water supply. So if the infrastructure is set correctly, it will not lead to damages. But in 2 degree scenarios, Daegu, Jeonnam, and Chungnam and Sejong area, the middle part of Korea will be hit the hardest. And 3 degrees scenario will have Jeju and Sejong area the hardest with longest drought days. Number of increase in drought will be highest in Ulsan under 2 degree scenarios by 1 month, and in 3 degrees scenario, Jeonbuk area will be increased by 0.9 month. And Daegu will experience the highest reduction impact, that is 1.4 month in 2 degrees and 1.7 month in 3 degree scenarios. Next is on the mountain fire. Although this is not directly linked to urban areas, but where there is redundant mountain fires, it will hurt air quality. So currently the threshold is 3.6 days for mountain fire risk index. So during 2 degrees, the days will increase by 7.7 days, and under 3 degrees, 6.4 days. So it will increase by twofold. The business as usual for 21st century would be Gangwon area. It will increase by 10.5 days. So if this continues, Gangwon will become an area where it's fit for mountain fire. And when you compare that to nationwide areas, Busan, Ulsan, Gyeongbuk area, which is the southern east area of Korea, will be hit the highest for mountain fires for 2 degrees, and for 3 degrees, Gangwon would be hit the highest. So when it comes to increased mountain fire, at 2 degrees scenario, Busan and southeast area in Korea will be hit the highest, and Gangwon will be hit the highest in under 3 degrees scenarios. And compared to BAU, Gangwon will have the most highest reduction impact under 2 degrees scenarios, and Incheon under 3 degrees Celsius scenarios. So without reduction, with reduction, we will have the overall situation improved, but without any reduction, the situation will be extreme. The government is coming up with measures, and even stronger measures. But from a strategic standpoint, we have to think about how much we're going to protect, how far are we going to go, and how private sector will participate, and how public sector will supplement. But we need certainty in an uncertain future. So because of this uncertainty, there's limitation in resource investment. So we need to generate enough information. Currently, we're not doing that. So we need to create forums to have this discussion and reduce the information gap between different stakeholders to produce enough information and communicate that. And we need to act fast. With that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for our first speaker. So regarding climate change, we really need to understand that this is an urgent issue. And I believe everyone here is in agreement. But as to what kind of effort we are making, we still need to think about what specifically we can do. So thank you very much. And before I introduce our second speaker, there is a quick announcement to make. This conference is proceeding on-site and online as well. So you can also join us online as well. And next, we'd like to take a look at what kind of efforts are being made by cities around the world. So from Korea Research Institute for Human Settlements, researcher An Ye-hyun is going to deliver the presentation. Please welcome Ms. An to the podium. Hello, I'm An Ye-hyun, as introduced. Today I want to talk about how foreign cities are dealing with climate change and what kind of efforts they are making to meet carbon neutrality. My contents of the presentation, why this is important, and then I will talk about some urban cases dealing with climate change. And also, I will talk about some implications from these overseas urban cases. So the international community, they're now working towards carbon neutrality, and they have various policies and laws. So we all know this target. We want to limit the temperature increase to or below 1.5 Celsius degree. And there are two main issues. and I'm going to talk about these two issues first. In terms of achieving carbon neutrality, we also need to achieve justice, fairness. And second, the international community, they're now looking at the space, the physical space, as an area to achieve carbon neutrality. Urban area takes up about 3% of the land surface, but takes up about 60% or 80% of the global energy consumption and 75% of greenhouse gas emissions. So urban areas are really a main emitter. So urban area urgently needs to move towards carbon neutrality. And in tandem with this understanding, Korea also announced our carbon neutrality goal. In 2015, Korea first set our nationally determined contribution, NDC, and Korea also submitted our long-term plan to achieve this goal to the international community. So Korea so far has been laying down some foundational work to achieve this goal, and we also set up the Green Growth Commission right under the presidential office. And last month, the current Yoon Suk-yeol administration, they also announced their strategy for greenhouse gas emission reduction plan and the overall carbon neutrality plan. So carbon neutrality scenario and NDC goals, each sector has roles to play. So we are taking sectoral approach in Korea. And if you look at so each policy area follows this sectoral approach. And also, if you look at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, they are now pursuing carbon neutrality, focusing on buildings and transportation. So they are building carbon database to this end. Local governments are emphasized for their roles and responsibilities. There are about 243 local governments that are participating in carbon neutrality in Korea, and their roles are being emphasized. But in reality, this kind of puts more burden on their administrative work at the local government level. So they are demanding for more support from the central government. Now let me talk about some overseas cases. What kind of efforts are being made by other countries' cities? So I want to talk about the cities' efforts to deal with climate change around the world. First, I want to talk about some overall overarching frameworks out there, or some big plans at the national level or at a city level. So depending on the city's environment and situation, some global cities are announcing their climate action plan. For example, Barcelona, they announced their own climate action plan. So they identified 242 tasks to do, and they developed 100 indicators to monitor. So, for example, they are going to increase the bicycle road by 165%, so that 95% of the citizens in Barcelona can easily access a bicycle road from their home. There's also a plan, for example, Aarhus Climate Action Plan and Energy Strategy Plan. They announced to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, and they're going to reduce carbon emission by 50% in the energy sector. So they're going to use more solar energy and wind power for buildings and industrial demand. In the case of London, they announced the National Park City Plan. So this is about observing carbons emitted into the air. So basically, they want to have a more green area in London. And to do that, they are going to introduce some innovative digital mapping tools, and they're going to demand urban developers to incorporate these green areas into their development plan. So each major global city now has their own efforts. There are some network events as well, network effort, for example, C40 cities. So here, this program supports cities around the world to deal with climate change. And they have some major core values, for example, emissions neutrality. And second, resilience to climate hazards. Third, inclusivity and benefits. And fourth, governance and collaboration. So these are the core elements of C40 cities. This is a network program among cities. And some more specific overseas cases. First, targeting buildings and energy consumption and conversion. For example, London. Starting 2016, all new residential buildings are now required to have a carbon reduction mechanism. And now starting at the end of 2019, this requirement is expanded to all new property, including non-residential property. And also, they also have a roadmap for buildings, and also have a carbon. They set a ceiling on carbon emission in New York, for example. And in Barcelona, in Spain, they provide education to their citizens about carbon emission and how to reduce carbon emission in their daily life. Stockholm in Sweden, they have a data park initiative. So basically, they collect data about wintertime heating demand. So they want to increase the heat recovery. They actually increased the heat recovery by 30%, and this is equivalent to reducing emission in the amount of 7,000 tons of CO2. Now, some efforts in the transportation area. Copenhagen and other cities in Denmark, they are now building a network of bicycle road to cover dozens of cities. So this is actually a 33-year project. And with this, when all the planned 45 routes are complete, then every year it will have the effect of reducing 1,500 tons CO2 emission. In Brazil, similar efforts are being made to promote walking and utilizing a bicycle. So they hope to reduce CO2 reduction by 265,000 tons every year. Now, some greening efforts in terms of fostering green park and green areas in the urban area. For example, in Medellin, in Colombia, they're building more green area, and also they want to deal with the heat island phenomenon within the urban area. In Durban, South Africa, they want to emphasize a resource recycle in connection with emission reduction. So they are going to plant, they actually are planning homogeneous plant, about 762,000 plants to observe 45,000 ton CO2. Next area, resource recycling. So in next bed in Denmark, they are building a glass industry cluster. So glass can be recycled. This way they try to reduce emission. And within this cluster, the recycled glass is going to be utilized to produce insulator. And they want to provide a surplus heat to a nearby city. In Lisbon, Portugal, they want to use water recycling. In Frederiksberg, in Denmark, they have a rainwater management act to recycle rainwater. So basically, all these per sector emission reduction mechanisms and tools, they are now part of urban development plan in these cities. So a good point to take away is we need to incorporate carbon neutrality into an urban planning. This way, we can reduce carbon emission, and also it can increase overall public benefit. So the urban area is now a kind of platform where these emission reduction mechanisms can be in place along with policy. So we need to build the right system and the mechanisms and support all these efforts. Second part of my talk is more focused on climate justice. So this is about California in the US. So this program, Transformative Climate Communities, TCC, this is about improving the environment, the public health, and the economy of the most vulnerable local community in California. So basically, the focus is on improving the local community infrastructure, and they provide monetary support. And you have some areas for the project, for example, housing development and water efficiency facility, green area, etc. So they want to use measurable data. So they want to target some measurable outcome and support the project. For financing, the California Carbon Credit Trading Program is going to be used to provide financing for this program. So this program has been going on for about 4 rounds. So there has been 4 rounds of programs under this initiative. One example is in the area of Fresno. They received about $66.5 million in subsidy, and the benefit went to 35,000 people in terms of better transportation and sustainable buildings. So here, the target is the most vulnerable local community in terms of transportation access. And next program is Justice 40 Initiative. So this one was actually inspired by the transformative climate communities in California. So since the inauguration of the Biden administration, they're really emphasizing climate change response. So there was an executive order to deal with the climate change. So as per that executive order, Justice 40 Initiative began. And now under this initiative, the Biden government is trying to identify various projects that can be done by federal departments. So as a result, about various programs were identified, and currently for the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and American Rescue Plan, all very initiative, and these laws and plans are the legal foundation for justice for the initiative. So if a program can meet the requirements put forward by these laws and the plan, then the program can be considered as part of Justice for the Initiative and receive support accordingly. So here, basically, the goal is basically this initiative recognizes that about to provide a more federal level investment to the marginalized community and local communities that bear a bigger share of environmental pollution. And the support can be given in the area of transportation and energy and affordable housing. So this program is at the federal level, and various programs are conducted by almost all federal level departments. If you look at the scope of the support, it's very broad and diverse under this initiative. For example, simple financial support program to technology validation program. So it's very broad, and there's going to be more programs being created under this initiative. And again, this program is to benefit the marginalized area, so target to bring 40% of the benefit of the program to the marginalized areas, and they're now trying to come up with a methodology to validate that. So the first step is actually to identify where are those marginalized local communities. So to this end, they developed a spatial map with the land data, from the land data, and they are trying to identify and also allow people to search such marginalized society. So marginalized by indicators, for example, environmental indicators and social indicators as well. So depending on the indicator that you select, you can find the marginalized area. So these indicators are based on demographic data. So these indicators are also used to check if the program meets the purpose of the program. And as of August 2022, about 39 federal programs fall under the Justice for the Initiative. And also 22 indicators were announced to define a marginalized area in terms of transportation. So basically, this is a whole of government approach, a whole of government initiative to mainstream climate change response targeting the marginalized areas. Next case is London. Until 2030, they have a goal to double the size of the green economy in London, and also to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So in terms of this Green New Deal in London, they also want to focus their investment in the marginalized areas. So to that end, they had a really in-depth economic impact evaluation to see what kind of specific benefit can come from this kind of efforts. So they want to minimize inequality in the society as they pursue the conversion to the low-carbon economy. So they realized that the transportation sector in London takes up about 35% of greenhouse gas emission, but take up only less than 5% in terms of employment. And also, a majority of people working in the transportation area are non-Caucasian. and also for below average weekly salary. So they are mapping this kind of area, and they want to resolve this current state. In Scotland, they have a national plan for climate change response, and now they're revising that plan, and also they want to emphasize fairness. Their principle is a place-based climate change action. So they're focusing on a local community demand and the circumstances. So they want to take a bottom-up approach. So all in all, what we can learn from these overseas cases is that they try to mainstream the fairness and inclusivity in every area. So just transition is an important theme here. So they now trying to use carbon neutrality and conversion to carbon neutrality, not just as a way to deal with the climate change, but also as a way to resolve inequality as well. And second, they want to have a scientific analysis about the current status and the environmental impact, and they are taking a spatial approach. So they're putting emphasis on place, locality, and they are coming up with a scientific measurable indicators and principle and evaluation method as well. So once again, the focus is on place. So they want to actively meet the local community's demand, and also they want to utilize private sector financing as well. And for example, carbon credit trading system or private sector investment. And again, they're taking a very integrated approach on a kind of platform. So I guess what we need to take away from this is that carbon neutrality can be a great opportunity for us to achieve more fairness and to reduce inequality in our society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please give her another warm round of applause. We were able to hear about different cases in different countries, and I think that has also a great implication for cities in Korea as well, and I hope you've gathered some great ideas. I believe that this would have probably provided great insight to our participants. It was mentioned in the presentation, but the role of cities are also very important, and which will be the title of our next presentation. And we'll be hearing on the disaster-safe city to respond to global climate abnormality. So please welcome our Jungmin Lee, Senior Researcher with LH Land and Housing Research Institute. The topic of my presentation follows the presentation by my previous predecessors who talked about the climate crisis response and also different cases. But when you look at current climate changes, how is it happening, and what are some of the serious risks to us, and what are some of the technology that are developed to curb this kind of climate threat? So we're looking at building safe cities to disasters. So I'm going to link the climate change issues to smart city development and technology as well. This is my agenda. I'm going to skip through this. If you look at existing city, and it is also same at LH, but it has been supplier centered. And nowadays, in future cities, you can see that cities pursue safe cities, carbon neutral cities, where it is focusing more on the user side. So the paradigm around cities are changing. Given the climate change and increasing carbon, as you can see, natural disasters are on the rise. And also we have seen rainstorm recently in urban cities, including Typhoon Hinnamro. As you can see, the criteria and safety requirement for natural disaster is going up. And if that happens, it has implication to our organization, LH, as well as different industries as well. And we now have 6th report, but when you look at IPCC report, this is from the 5th report, but as you can see, this is the rise of temperature. And once a temperature rises, what would happen? This is from the past. This is the flood in 2010 and 2011. Over 1,000 people have died, and there has been enormous damages. This is Poland. This is Pakistan. As you can see, over 10 million people have lost their homes, and 1% of GDP was lost in Queensland, Australia. This is Thailand, Bangkok, and this is in 2009, about 10 years ago. About 5 million people had suffered from water shortage, drinking water shortage. And this is glacier impacted by natural disaster. As you can see, glacier is almost gone. And this is the face of climate change. In Korea, we have Typhoon Memi, also Typhoon Ewinia, and Typhoon Lusa. And recently, as you can see here, in 2022 August, we had enormous damage in metropolitan area. And then also there was Typhoon Hinnamno. On the right side, you have people, you have a person holding an umbrella. That's where the water level was at. And people drowned because of this. And on the bottom side, you have a basement parking lot. And it was September 6th, about 5 to 6 in the morning. And 8 people have been in the parking lot, and only 2 survived and 6 died in the parking lot under basement. And here the alert that was issued was people had this radio notice saying that because the parking lot is being flooded, please get your car out from the basement parking lot. That's why people had to go. So compared to the past, as you can see, the damages and casualties are going up by 3 to 5-fold. Under Yoon's administration, the focus is now on building a water environment and natural ecosystem environment that is strong in climate crisis, and the situation is now being adjusted. And Ministry of Land and Transportation, they're also revising regulation around building and construction city, and there also has been some plans to build a disaster-proof, safe city, and also a low-impact development, LID development is being expanded, and we're also rolling out different ways and technology to respond to and prepare for climate change. And Agency for Forest Administration is now shifting their paradigm to prevention and preventive measures. And at Ministry of Land and Transportation, they have established a project team 5 years ago, and this team will go into exploration this year. And what they have researched in is they looked into Daegu City and other smart cities. And by looking into mid-sized cities, they're doing a cross-verification and cross-validation to develop technology which is safe to disaster. And I oversee the safety part of it. And in Daegu, what we do is we look into flood prevention, and we also look at steep landscape areas and heat wave as well. Daegu City, when you look at this area, they don't necessarily have a lot of flood in the area, but we did also look into the rescue measures as well. The red dotted area is the underground water holes. So if there is about 60 to 70 meters of precipitation, there will be warnings and alerts that is issued. So in preparing for climate changes, how is this different? And how it works is that this is almost real-time prediction of the situation that might happen in an hour or two. So in the past, when you look at flood map, or we worked with scenarios to respond to different precipitation situations, and that was used to issue alert. But here, what we do is we look at these different water holes in the city areas to anticipate how the precipitation will be unfolded because in Seoul area or in Pohang area, if we were to predict this, and if we were able to issue an alert on looking at the manhole situation, we could have saved some lives, especially if there's people living in the basement apartments. So if there is quite rapid flooding or inundation that is being taken, then we can prevent this kind of situation. This was a typhoon Hinnamno situation, which was in September. I only go home during the weekend because of my work, and it was on Friday, which was September 6th, and we were aware of the typhoon Hinnamno coming. And my wife said, "Why are you going back to Daegu when typhoon is coming?" So she was concerned. But at that time, this is the inundated flood area in Daegu area. So what we looked at is that this was before the rain, and then we took a picture of it. So this was 5th of September, and our team gathered together, and there were a lot of complaints. But then for the local community, we went out to take pictures. So this was situation on the 5th, and when typhoon was hit, the bottom picture is what happened. So this is what happened when the typhoon was hit. What we could have done better or improved is that when typhoon was coming, Daegu was flooded from 50 millimeters of rain, and then the rain moved to Pohang area from Daegu. From a researcher standpoint, we were actually ready to do the study in Daegu area, but then this situation did not aggravate, so we were not able to see what would happen. But we did reach an alert situation, so we observed the neighborhood. So this is K-Guard, an app from the government, and 1 or 2 hours before the rain, we would warn the residents and community about the rainstorm. So we would send out warning messages, and the residents will take pictures of the street and send the picture to the K-Guard. So it's an interactive app between government and the residents. So what you can see here is that in the 6 in the morning, we warned that you shouldn't go outside. So this is the message that we sent out. And Pohang had the same situation, but at Pohang, what happened in their parking lot in the apartment, and the parking lot actually had a different situation. I mean, there was an announcement. They said, go into the basement parking lot to take your car out. So they were not able to correctly respond to the situation, and a lot of casualty took place. So this is the video clip of how we responded. This is the control room. Do we have sound? So as you can see, this is the platform for checking the inundated flood areas. And we have some sound here, but I'm not getting any sound. Anyway, the blue color ones are the inundated area, and there is warnings that is issued, and looking at the precipitation pattern, we would issue this kind of warning. And before 1 or 2 hours, we would issue near real-time warning. The red ones are the inundated area or flooded area, and when the warning is issued, we would send an emergency messages to an area if this dot turns red from blue. And residents there in the area will look at the messages. If not, they need to respond from their house on their own. But this is based on very detailed GPS location data. So not just locations, we can also check the adjacent area as well. Sometimes there are guerrilla showers that only takes place in certain regions, and we also look into that. And if we need to dispatch responders, we also have system to connect the disaster area with first responder as well. I have some comments and sounds of the video, but I'm not getting any sound. Anyway, so we had this verification process we've done, and what I want to end with is that not just flood, but when it comes to heat wave and other climate change response is done in link with engineering as well. And there is use of digital twin and smart technology as well. I'm overseeing the research effort for smart city research, and for smart city research, we look into heat wave and flood area, and we leverage digital twins. LH leads this research, and we are also joined by EDTRI and K-Water and other different public institutions. And at EDTRI, the EDTRI actually created the smart hub or smart technology-based safe city, and they created smart architecture to contribute to smart city. What we did with the smart city technology is that we leveraged actual raw data to transform that to water circulation system data. And then through simulation, we send the simulated data to the control tower. And in the 6-4 area, in Sejong area, we created the modeling for operational simulator. And we created the engineering system for the control center. And using simulated and modeled data, we created the shared database. Why this is important is because when we apply a smart city technology, it sounds easier than when it's actually implemented. So it's meaningful that we create a certain guideline for doing that, because that's challenging. We have some legacy data. We also have some relevant DBs that has been formed. As you can see, this is the water resource data that has been visibly visualized. And on the right side, when you do this engineering, we sometimes do clean water engineering and sewage water engineering separately, but we here see the integrated engineering done together. So we also built level 4 LOD from LOD 0 as well. So on the right side, we have inundated area as well as heat wave hit areas. So digital twin is a tool to visualize. But what we want to get from this is that, although it was mentioned in the presentation, but people, when it comes to climate change, they respond and adapt to climate change. We need some tools to make it easier to respond and adapt to climate change. So digital twin is an important tool to do that. But then, is this tool apply separately for climate change versus transportation versus fine particle matters versus transportation? It's actually not all that different. So under Smart City, you will have an integrated database, and that could be used as an integrated database to build scenarios for all different climate change scenarios and crisis. So that's something that I want to emphasize. We need to integrate and use this together. What you see here is this is what we did as a demo when it comes to COVID-19 response and flooding. So we added new service, and this video was created in May and June. And Sejong was replicated as a prime digital twin and water system, and also all the water supply pipeline can be shown. All the water volume that flew in could also be analyzed by different region to understand how much water is being consumed by each different local district. Also, if this rainwater, we would simulate how much water will flow out after the rain. And when it comes to temperature, we have LID equipment to monitor on the land permeation, and impact on land is also collected. So there are many different areas that we can apply this to predict heat wave for decision makers. This was the first of its kind in Korea. So what I want to end with is that technology is very mature and technology is there. Then having said that, in responding to climate change, then what do we do now and where do we go from here? As you can see, this is rainwater and sewage water, and there are sensors installed along the line across the pipeline. And what we're doing is what we call LID modeling and LID monitoring. And it's also linked to green infrastructure as well for land forestation or greening of land. In the interest of time, I'm going to end here. This is my conclusion page. So maybe we can convert the crisis of climate change into a new future growth engine and future business opportunities by improving existing system and regulation. And we don't just involve environmental experts, but also involve engineers and people from technology to have converged research projects. And through testbed, let's experiment new technology. So that's the key message I want to deliver for this presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for that presentation. Thank you. The presenter talked about safe and happy city and the kind of research that he's carrying out to make our cities more happier and safer. City is very close to our daily lives. So in order for us to have safe cities, we have some challenges that we need to resolve, and I think that's going to contribute to the future of our cities. Thank you very much for the presentation.
And we have a lot to share thanks to our three speakers. Climate change, carbon neutrality, these are really global topics that we need to think about and work together. So how we can come up with a smart strategy for climate change? So I guess that's why we have today's conference. And all the great presentation was really insightful. And based on these presentations, now we are going to have a panel discussion. So based on what we talked about so far, we will have a panel discussion in the era of global climate change, how we can build a safe city to live in. I'd like to invite our moderator first, Professor Lee Dong-gun from Seoul National University, who is also chair at the Climate Change Forum at the National Assembly. For the panelists, we have Professor Kim Hyung-gyu from Hongik University, Professor Park Chan from University of Seoul, and the researcher Lee Eun-seok from Architecture and Urban Research Institute, and Mr. Lee Eun-yeop, the head of the LHI Land and Housing Institute Research Center. So we are going to have about 30 minutes for the discussion. Now let me hand over the microphone to our moderator. Hello, as introduced, I am Lee Dong-gun from Seoul National University, and all the three presenters really talked about important issues. So the first speaker talked about the climate change and the importance of carbon neutrality. It really made me realize how what a risk these challenges are. And Ms. An talked about some overseas urban cases, how they are dealing with climate change, but they are also dealing with this climate change in a way to achieve justice in the society. And Dr. Lee then talked about what we can do in Korea. So with these topics, we have 4 panelists. So we have 4 panelists, so we are given about 30 minutes. And perhaps, I guess I can give 6 minutes to each panelist. So let me first invite our first panelist, who is working in the urban development area, Professor Kim Hyung-gyu. Hello, as introduced, I am Kim Hyung-gyu. I teach at Hongik University. I really enjoyed all 3 presentations and I learned a lot. So I want to actually share my take on each presentation. First, regarding the first presentation. So Dr. Jung talked about the climate change challenges and how serious they are. When there was a recent news report by NBC, and they dispatched a journalist to Jakarta who took a look at the rising sea level. So we now really can put numbers to the severity of these issues, and we can think about the future implications if we do nothing about it. And also in Korea as well, Daegu, for example, Daegu is known to be very warm city, and there was some discussion about running a simulation in Daegu. But I think that this kind of efforts need to be done not just in Daegu, but Seoul, Busan, Ulsan, Daejeon, and other these highly populated cities as well. So I hope that we will expand it to other cities and study about this. And the next speaker really gave us great ideas about what to consider in dealing with the climate change. And also, for example, wildfire as well. Wildfire rarely happens in Seoul, for example. So urban dwellers don't have much experience of wildfire. So we don't know how serious this is. But actually, if you look at the statistics, wildfire is getting more serious and frequent and causing damage to people living nearby. This can also hamper a stable supply of agricultural products. We often talk about proneness to flooding, but wildfire is also becoming an important type of disaster in Korea as well. And we also need to put some specific efforts to deal with this. But climate change oftentimes takes less priority compared to other issues. So, and also the second speaker really talked about some overseas cases, basically climate action related action plans put forward by many cities. She mentioned about some public sector led climate action plans. I want to talk about Carnegie Foundation's Resilient City Plan. So there are some private sector led efforts as well. So all the examples that she talked about, we can actually Google them. We can Google climate action plan, climate change action plan, and the search result can give you a lot of information about what kind of efforts are being made. So all this knowledge and information are at our fingertips, but we are still not much active in terms of utilizing this information and making efforts. Many local government programs and initiatives, if you really look into them, they're kind of a copy and paste. They're very repetitive. And but what the second speaker, compared to the overseas cases that the second speaker talked about, we in Korea still have a long way to go. But definitely, these overseas cases can be a great example for us to learn from. For example, we really need to build a multi-level governance, and also we need to have a direct connection between these climate action elements and the existing urban development plans. The last presentation talked about digital twin, sensor monitoring. I believe that all these technologies are already ready and in place. So it is up to us to implement them and operate them. And it will require a political will and financial investment as well. So to sum it all, what is encouraging is that nowadays people recognize the seriousness of a climate crisis. And I hope that this will not just end up being a one-off event as we are having this conference. I hope that we can really see more specific actions and efforts are being made. Thank you very much.
I want to summarize, but I am out of time. So anyway, to summarize, we need to be more genuine and we need more private sector. And also, we have to end at 2:38. So let's go into more details. And next discussant is a climate change expert, and he carries out MBS research. We have with us Professor Chan Park from University of Seoul. Good afternoon. My name is Chan Park for U of S. Very nice to meet you all. Rather than going into each of the presenters, I would like to try to consolidate some of my discussion. All talks talked about the seriousness of climate change, and the disaster actually is now being caused more by climate change, and we are also moving to climate neutrality, carbon neutrality, and responding to climate change, and that's how we're preparing and preventing this. And we also see this concept subnation. It could be municipal government, it could be corporate, it could be institutional NGO. But in order to reduce carbon and respond to climate change, we want to immerse this, and that's something that organizations should do. LH talked about water research and responding to water issues. But then at the end of the day, what we have to do is who, why, and what we need to do. And what we see in subnation is that we do practical carbon reduction and climate change response. We have to decide on who does what and how. That needs to be clarified. Only then we can play the role that we are given. So that's the most critical part in my view. One other thing I want to discuss is that the issue of justice and the issue of citizenship was also mentioned, or issue of citizen was mentioned. When it comes to whether it's carbon reduction or climate change, many think that it's the obligation of the nation or government and municipal government, but I think it's actually the citizen who has the ultimate obligation because they build houses and they consume different resources. So engaging citizens would be critical, and establishing ways for them to engage is something that we need to find. When you look at the U.S. and and Europe, they're actually going through the citizen diagnostics and also proliferating the findings to engage citizens. So finding right ways to engage citizens should be the way forward. Another thing is that we also talked about laws and regulation and institution. So the laws and regulation behind existing cities, existing city development and environment needs to be changed. So there has been extensive discussion on how we're going to change that. But then we do still have to talk about in detail how we're going to implement that. So whether it's a carbon neutrality or a climate adapted cities, it's going to require lots of funding. That's for sure. We talk about also reconstructing and renewing our city infrastructure. But at the end of the day, someone has to pay for that. So who's going to pay for that, and how are we going to distribute that cost? If we don't discuss that matter, we will have the plan and implementation, but it will not get implemented. So we need to link this plan and implementation plan with citizens. Only then we can respond to carbon neutrality and climate adaptation. And thanks for mentioning me as a nature or a nature-based solution expert. So nature does contribute, and through nature reservation, we can also contribute. And that also includes changing our lifestyle as a citizens. As a society that emitted a lot of carbon, we also want to shift to less carbon consumption toward more nature-based solution. And what is important here is diagnostic, planning, and monitoring. So we need to understand the current status to reduce carbon and adapt to climate, but we don't have enough knowledge and data, and therefore there's a lack of alignment. Also, with great diagnostic, we need great planning. Sometimes it's not translated into a good plan. So you do feasibility study, but then the feasibility study does not get translated into plan. So robust planning is needed. And also we need monitoring to see whether or not it was actually implemented. So whether it's nature-based solution or whether it's climate or adaptation, we need great planning and implementation. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, when you look at the two discussants, they talked about how to link regulation and laws and plans with actual implementation.
Third panelist is actually working in the construction area, and he is researching how to incorporate climate change action in construction. Mr. Yoon Suk. Hello, I work at Architecture and Urban Research Institute, and today's topics particularly about climate change response. So I want to summarize the presentations as I understood. So there is based on the SPC scenarios, we now need to, we can see how the climate change response is going to unfold here in Korea. That was the first presentation. And also for some specific actions that we need to take. That was done by the second presenter. And the last presenter talked about when we are faced with this climate change, how we can adapt to technologies that are in place to deal with climate change. So it was a really great time to think about the ways to deal with climate change. I believe that there are two big directions urban cities need to take. One, how to reduce carbon emission. Second, how to deal with climate change within urban environment. These are not separate tasks. They can be undertaken in tandem. So if you look at the urban environment, there is a SPC and human activities are very concentrated in urban area. So urban area is actually can have a really bigger impact on the environment. At the same time, the urban environment is a home to many sources of carbon emission as well. So definitely, we need to consider both factors. But unfortunately, if you look at various existing policies has been focused on giving incentives or subsidies. But going forward, I believe that just providing incentive is not going to be enough. So we really need to think hard about it. So I have two proposals. One, reducing carbon emission. So far, incentive provision has been the main method to deal with it. But here, if you do not have any monetary incentive, then you are not motivated to reduce carbon emission. For example, purchasing an EV or a green building. And purchasing an EV and green building definitely means more financial burden on the party who's making that kind of effort. So in the private sector market, for example, we need to leave it up to the market economy, for example. So we need to let the market economy function in this way to incentivize to make the right choices. And second, regarding the climate change adaptation, so perhaps this is definitely the area for the public sector to take interest in. And as the third speaker mentioned, when flooding occurs, there are definitely the vulnerable localities. There are typically areas lacking in infrastructure. So we need to build the right infrastructure that can function as a buffer against such natural disasters. So in terms of climate change adaptability, the public sector needs to take a look at how to better prepare infrastructure. And for example, there's a great infrastructure with a given capacity, and instead of repeating this same kind of existing infrastructure, we need to come up with different types of infrastructure, more green infrastructure that can really adapt to a changing environment. So there are a lot of products and the services are being offered to deal with the climate change. So for example, so climate change adaptability should be one criteria to design new products and services. And also, we need to have a secure and viable urban environment. To do that, we urgently need to switch to green infrastructure. So that's my quick comment. Thank you very much.
So city is an area and space where we need to do both reduction and adaptation. So the response for adaptation and reduction is both different. So I fully agree with that, but there is an issue for green infrastructure, and that is definitely the challenge that we need to solve for. We now have our last panelist, who is our host, and in LH, he is probably the one who think about reduction and adaptation in both as well. So we have with us Unap Lee, the research head of LH Research Institute. Thank you for that introduction, but I don't think I would have enough time for syndicating all the discussion, but I would like to reflect upon what I have felt. I really enjoyed all three presentations. It was a great opportunity for me to learn. Based on what Dr. Chung said, I can feel that climate change is coming faster than we thought, and it was actually a very clear trend. We knew about this, but it was actually faster and more clearer than we have anticipated. Also, recently, the words that we hear more is climate change, and climate change has ended, and climate disruption is now happening. And I guess where Dr. Chung is coming from really amplifies that. When you look at international community, there's injustice, imbalance, and that has become a global issue nowadays. Climate crisis is also an added crisis, an added challenge for us. Although it was mentioned in the presentation, what we can see is there is significant gap between regions, and also those who created a climate crisis is not paying for what they have created. So the adaptation strategy for urban areas need to be also considered in terms of climate welfare as well, and climate justice. Dr. An introduced to us overseas cases for climate justice. It was a great opportunity for me to understand what climate justice was about. There was a lot of discussion about overseas cases, but we also need to learn from the failure cases as well. For the first time in the world, Masdar, who sought to become the first carbon neutral city, was not successful because they didn't have enough infrastructure, but their target was actually higher than what they can deliver. So we were able to see that issue. In pursuing carbon neutral city, we also need to benchmark success cases, but also failure cases as well, so that we don't go through the unnecessary trial and error. And all three presenters mentioned that even if we pursue carbon neutrality, the existing carbon and existing greenhouse gas could cause climate changes and climate crisis. Given such a situation, future cities need to consider adaptation and reduction as well. So both need to be considered, and carbon neutral cities need to pursue climate neutral cities as well. And Dr. Lee talked about the technology side of it. In Korea, IT and network is rather strong. So if we can leverage this strong infrastructure, we can develop strong disaster prevention cities by leveraging this kind of different smart cities and using the digital twin in order to make the strongest city. Prevention is a key. So digital twin and augmented reality is something that we can consider. Here, what is important is that it shouldn't be a one-way communication, because there are many stakeholders. We need two-way communication, and it has to be interactive. So digital twin has to be interactive, inviting many stakeholders. Last but not least, because my time is up, if I may wrap up, in a climate crisis situation, we need to pursue climate neutral city and carbon neutral cities. But city also has its intrinsic value as well. So if you just pursue carbon neutrality, we don't want to end up with just very unilateral and uniform cities. So we want to also balance the uniqueness and originality of city with carbon neutrality. As a host of this meeting, thank you for that summary. And at LH Corporation, I'm sure when you create housings and cities in the future, you will create climate situations and carbon neutrality for the future cities and housings. So thank you for the discussions, and we only have 5 to 6 minutes. So I want to give an opportunity to our 3 presenters. So in the cities that we live in, how can we do better? What can we improve? So based on your experience, you can talk about the question for 1 minute.
Can someone please hand a microphone to our speakers? Just 1 minute summary or 1 minute last comment. Well, all the panelists gave us really great comments, so I don't know how to respond to all of them in 1 minute. But my concern is that passion cannot resolve everything. We really need to have a specific and well thought out plan, and we need to monitor actions taken as well. So to do that, we need to define the problems, define the methodology, and define what to do, agree on what to do. So this is not just the technology aspect. For example, Korean people are known to be emotional. So if we take only a technical approach, then we might not be able to get the public's support. So we need to invite people to think about this topic together and to think about what we can do. So that's my last comment. Thank you very much. And next, Dr. An. Thank you very much for all your great comments. And the private sector and the civil participation and urban approach. I really took note of your comments, so thank you very much. I was asked to talk about overseas urban cases, and as I was studying this topic, putting together my presentation, I really realized that we need to gather evidence, and we need to think about what will be a more effective tools out of all the things that we discussed here today. And also, ultimately, we need to raise the public's awareness and invite their participation. Thank you very much. So more study to do. And next, Dr. Lee. I will be brief due to the time limit. So I'm a researcher, and my major is in water resource management in the urban area. And as I study my field, the people who work in the climate change area or construction and engineering area, I often talk to people working in these areas. I believe that they need to be invited into studying these topics because in each sector, people have different view about climate change and climate change response. So we really need to have a cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary convergence in terms of research, so that we can perhaps come up with a great test bed for ideas. I'm sure we have a big audience on site today, so any comment or question from the floor? Okay, over there.
Please hand over the microphone. Hello, I'll be short. I work in the LH Global Cooperation Center. And I asked Dr. Lee to participate in this event because nowadays LH is pursuing many global projects. And when it comes to climate crisis and environmental issues, there are many businesses and many requests from the developing countries on this. The World Bank and UN Habitat request about climate issue and climate solution. So these audience are also participating in this conference, although remotely through online platform. So not just in Korea, but we also need to engage international stakeholders as well. Thank you for coming, and it was really productive session. With that, now I would like to conclude our session. So we are having Global Korea Forum 2022. So we discussed about our challenges, but this is something that we have to discuss and solve for on a global scale. So with that, we end our panel discussion. Thank you for staying with us. Thank you very much. Please give another round of warm applause for all the panelists. Thank you. Our chair also mentioned that future is also intimidating, but in order to solve climate issue, we need to involve everyone, not just in the cities, but because we're members of global society, we have to be responsible and should not hesitate to act. I hope that the discussion that we had today will become a foundation for a better future for climate response. So we have carried out Global Climate Change and Carbon Neutral Cities Conference. With that, we end our official program. My name is Sun Young Jang, your MC. Thank you.